Welcome, ladies and gents. Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Two very special guests that I've got today, Gman and also Jamie Bourne from Punch Perfect Boxing, two terrific boxing analysts. Unfortunately, I did record an interview and the introduction was completely messed up. I had some problems with the internet. When I then converted it and played it back, it seemed fine. They were willing to redo the introduction very graciously, but it seemed fine. And then as I started to play it through, I saw that, yeah, it genuinely did have big moments where it was just freezing and jumping and stuff like that. So just a little introduction part, I'll do it for them and I'll do my best to give them the props they deserve. G-Man needs no introduction, of course. I'm sure you're all aware of his channel. He's up to 6,000 subscribers now and it's very well deserved. He covers the news, the themes of the day. He's got a bit of a specialism when it comes to the female game as well, women's boxing. He really knows his stuff. He's interviewed a few female boxers too. So that's certainly a channel you guys need to be checking out. The other one, of course, is the terrific young man called Jamie Bourne from Punch Perfect Boxing. He's also a really good analyst that analyzes the themes of the day, the various questions of boxing and what is in the press, in the news and stuff like that, as well as a real specialism when it comes to the amateur scene. So if you're really interested in the stars of the future, or perhaps some of the stars of the amateur game that maybe will not turn pro, you know, Cuban fighters, for instance, who, because of the dictatorship they live in, will not be afforded that opportunity. If you're interested in that sort of stuff, you've got to get over to Jamie Bourne's channel at Punch Perfect Boxing. Hope you guys enjoy the interview and I hope you guys get involved in the themes that we discuss. We disagree on quite a few things, so it'll be interesting to see everybody's opinion. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Enjoy the interview. Let's start off with the lightweight division. Let's start off with Kambosos and Devin Haney. Kambosos has put up a poll to ask who he should fight next. And obviously this has caused much of a furore, I guess you could say, online. And Devin Haney didn't take too kindly to it. And he's basically been demanding to know why he's not next in line. And basically Kambosos said, you know exactly what needs to happen for you to make the fight happen. Maybe sell some of your jewelry. Devin Haney's been putting up some very blinging jewelry of late. And you don't have to go to Jupiter, brother, just 80,000 miles across the Pacific down under. And Devin Haney said, yeah, we all know you want a bidding war, but you know who's really putting up the money. You said I would be next to keep that same energy. And Kambosos said, I just want a real war with great fans. My energy never changes. You know that. Let's just hope you and your teams don't either. Happy New Year. Dev, the Emperor, is patiently waiting and don't make me wait too long. The three other names are knocking on the door too. Now, in fairness to Kambosos, when he was asked by Devin Haney if he wanted this fight next, he says yes, as long as it makes sense. And he seems to be alluding to the fact here that maybe there's some sort of a backtrack on the fight happening in Australia. He's saying if you want it to happen, that's what needs to happen. Basically, put up the money and come to Australia. Something that Eddie Hearn seemed to be saying was perfectly reasonable and that they were willing to do. I'm not sure what's going on behind the scenes. I'm not sure if this is just bluster or if they are indeed in advanced talks. What I want to ask you both is, who do you think George Kambosos should fight next and why? I'll lay that off to Jamie first.
So for me, I think the Devin Haney fight is the one that springs to mind first. I did think that the Lomachenko fight might be the one that takes precedent because I feel like the WBO haven't ordered a mandatory for a very long time, and with Bob's relationship with the WBO, he might be able to pull some strings and kind of get that involved. But you'd like to think in most cases the governing bodies kind of come together for an undisputed fight, and that's for me the main reason I want to see it happen. Is there's too much talk of whether, you know, when Lopez was champion as well, whether they are undisputed, you know, whether which WBC champion should be considered the actual champion. So I'd like to see it for that reason. And I also think I see Haney and Kambosos a bit more competitive, just in my opinion. I still have Lomachenko just on ability a little bit higher than everyone else, and I feel like for a first fight for Kambosos in his reign, he could potentially lose that fight. And for all the fondness we have of that night of him beating Teofimo Lopez, perhaps we lose that a little bit if he goes into a Lomachenko fight and loses. Where I think Haney is a little bit more competitive. It settles that undisputed kind of debate that keeps going on. And yeah, I just feel like for me, that's the one I want to see happen. And even from a Haney perspective, I think it's a good opportunity for him as well to perhaps separate himself from the conversations of the kind of rubbish four kings, etc.
G-Man?
Yeah, no, I agree with Jamie on that. And I myself would agree. I'd like to see him against Haney. I think ever since Cambosos won, it's just been kind of confusing. You know, I mean, with Teofimo Lopez, he wasn't listed as undisputed. Then Sullivan said, "Oh no, Cambosos is." I'd like to see that just kind of get put to end and have these two fight. I think it's a great fight. I was a bit surprised that Jamie said the WBO didn't actually name Vasily Lomachenko as mandatory following the Richard Comey fight, because Lomachenko's fought for that title in three different weight divisions. Bob Arum was very close with him. I was very surprised they didn't announce that. For me, I think that fight is excellent. I would give George Campos a very good chance against Devin Haney. A lot of people have said they haven't been impressed with how Haney has looked in, his recent performances. And, I think that Campos is just on ability. He is better than both those guys, both Linares and Jojo Diaz. I wonder if an issue with Haney is the fact that Kambosos wants this in Australia. Australia is not the most straightforward country to get into now at the minute. And I wonder if maybe Devin Haney is looking at that and thinking, well, hang on a sec, it's one thing to fight in Australia, but the hoops we'll have to jump through just to get into that country might be another factor that maybe has, Haney saying, well, it ain't gonna happen in Australia.
You see, you make a very fair point. And some of these measures, which, I don't have to hide my views on here. People know are not based on science at all, to be honest with you. But is it just an excuse to say, I don't want to go to Australia because of the measures, and he would be willing to travel? Or is it a case of them looking to find an excuse to get home advantage? How do you guys see that? In other words, do you believe them when they say we were genuinely willing to go to Australia and we're still willing? Or do you believe that was just smokes and mirrors?
I think there's a willingness to have the fight, but I do think there is a bit of hesitation about going to Australia, because don't get me wrong, we've had some great fighters from Australia throughout the years, some of the greatest fighters from Australia, but it's not exactly a hot spot for boxing, especially for fighters from the US. They don't go over there particularly. Devin Haney early in his career took himself to Mexico and kind of went down a different route, really, where he built himself up on some smaller hall shows. So we have seen that sign of him traveling. I do think with some of the younger American fighters, the idea of having to travel abroad, especially somewhere as far as that, is so I do think it's probably the travel thing holding it up, in my opinion. I do think Haney questions whether he should be going over to Australia and sort of giving Kambosos a bit of an advantage, really. Home crowd, Australian fans, you probably notice it on your videos whenever you do a video about Tim Zhu or whatever, you get a lot of Australian fans in the comments. They're passionate, they'll be rowdy in the live venue and stuff. So he would be giving away some advantages there. So, yeah, I think it's more hesitation, really, than not necessarily wanting to fight there.
But considering that Kambosos is considered by the WBC to be the main man, regardless of where you stand on the whole question of undisputed, the WBC seem to have him as their number one fighter as well. Surely there's always going to be an A side and a B side. Devin Haney himself actually referred to Kambosos as the A side when they were talking about the potential split in the cut. So doesn't it come with the territory, G-Man? If you're going to try to take the title away from a champion, surely that will require travel. I mean, why would the Aussie champion have to fight in the United States? Why wouldn't the American champion have to travel to Australia?
Yeah, and with Haney strikes me as an actually confident character. And just from the outside looking in, I wouldn't imagine he would have much of an issue in traveling. I would imagine anyway. I'm sure he looks at that, and if he feels confident enough that he could beat Kambosos, I think he would travel like that. If you're looking at like a good example, we seen what happened to Brian Jennings. He wouldn't fight Rivas because of the restrictions in place in Canada, because he'd done his whole camp in America for basically it to shut down
you get a lot of American fighters. We saw it from the years of Joe Calzaghe as being champion, that are very reluctant to travel. And I know Jamie pointed to Devin Haney starting his career in Mexico. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, that was because he started when he was 17. And in the United States, you're not allowed to turn pro before 18, whereas in Mexico you are. So he was operating in Mexico early on simply out of necessity. Whereas, he would have still been the A side, knowing that they were a prospect. I'm sure he would have had a promoter that was looking after him there. Now he's the B side. And this thing of, you're giving up certain advantages. The question is, other fighters from around the world always do that when they're fighting in the United States, ultimately. So why is there this sort of level of entitlement, perhaps, this idea that, no, you need to travel to the US? I'm just wondering about that. But hopefully they can get it over the line. That would be a great fight to see. I agree with you guys. It would be my first choice in terms of legacy in many, many years to come. We don't know how Devin Haney's career is going to go, of course, but Lomachenko goes down as one of the greatest of all time, as far as I'm concerned. Just his achievement holistically in the amateurs, what he's done already in the pros, he's incredible. So a win over Lomachenko, if he was to get that, which I don't think he would. I've always said, even prior to Kambosos against Lopez, I've always felt that Loma was still the best in the division, and I felt he would have beaten Lopez in a rematch. And so historically, that could go down as a real big tick, but it's still subjective. If you're talking objectively, surely being the undisputed, without a dispute, so to speak, would be the one that gives him a real tick by his name. So I agree. I think that Devin Haney is the fight to make. If you had to guess, though, so not just who you want, if you had to guess, who do you think Kambosos will be fighting in 2022 next?
I think for me, I just can't shake that feeling of the Lomachenko thing with the WBO. I just feel like there's more to kind of be said there. I'm just going to go off my kind of gut, really. And the WBO haven't called a mandatory lightweight for many years now. It's gone on for quite a while, and they're next in line to do so. I just feel like if that's what Loma's still chasing, which he's made clear, he still wants to become undisputed. That's kind of what he wants before he retires. I feel like he'll be pushing Bob to try and go all out to get that for him. I just feel like there's going to be a little bit more thrown up in these negotiations with Haney, etc. And I think Loma has more of a say than being made out at this point in time. So I'm going to go a little bit different and think that Loma might sneak in there.
And would you consider it a duck? This question goes to both of you. If he was to fight Lomachenko next, I mean, if he was to fight Haney next, because he's got the excuse of, I want that undisputed title, nobody could say the Loma fight's a duck, especially if he then says he wants to fight Lomachenko next. And he has said he wants to take them all out one by one. Whether that's, he manages it or not, that's a whole different story. Kambosos says that's his aim. Whereas if he goes after Lomachenko next instead of Devin Haney, when Loma doesn't have any gold at the moment, would either of you see that as a potential duck? G-Man?
Personally, no, because Lomachenko is, in my opinion, the best in the division. He might not have a title, but he's the best in the division. And that is a real legacy-defining fight. I mean, if I wouldn't pick Kambosos over Lomachenko personally, if you went in there and you did beat him, I mean, Teofimo Lopez and Vasyl Lomachenko, if he still has the intention of facing Devin Haney after, then I wouldn't see that as a duck now. If he still has the intention of going through with Devin Haney, maybe this mandatory, as Jamie said, gets called, he goes in there with Lomachenko, who, in my opinion, as I said, is still the best in the division, just on pure skill.
And what's interesting as well, Jamie, earlier you mentioned that you felt that maybe he should go the way of Devin Haney because he's more likely to lose to Lomachenko, something which I also, like I said, I agree with. But from a tactical perspective, it might be, if you're looking at it long-term, smarter to try and perhaps tank next might be the more intelligent option, actually, because what could happen is you start to see Loma aging more, and we know that Devin Haney is struggling to make the weight. He's a massive lightweight. It could be that the longer he waits it out, the more chance he has. And I wonder if they do go down that route of trying to be smart and tactical. I can't see it personally. They don't strike me as being chess players, to be honest with you. They just seem to want all that smoke at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. We'll move on to the next topic. Let's talk a little bit about Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua. Alexander Usyk has given a couple of different interviews, and one of them he said he still really wants to be undisputed. It would be a major statement for him. A very loud statement is exactly what he said. He also not questioned, but he was asked about the mentality of Anthony Joshua in the past. And he said that there were some unusual behaviors. He was referring to Andy Ruiz, the walkout in that fight and how he was chewing on the gum shield. But he said that wasn't necessarily what other people seem to think it was. It doesn't necessarily equate to any sort of breakdown or anything like that. It might have just been something that was going on internally. And so he can't comment on that. He says that his own mental state is fine. It's as it was before the Anthony Joshua fight. That he's traveled to a few different European countries, basically enjoying himself after the victory, but that he's the same sort of person, same principles and standards is what he said. And that if Anthony Joshua is coming for war, which is what AJ has promised, that he's more than ready for it. Now, we've seen Anthony Joshua working on the pads. He's been working in Dubai. We know that he was working with a whole bunch of different trainers out in the United States. He's also doing the same thing in Dubai now, working with a trainer out there, Coach Wilson. And they've been working on a couple of things that I find interesting. One of them is grappling. He seems to be involved in a lot of grappling. And the other thing, he's been throwing a combination on the pads, which is a combination I really like, whereby he's throwing you lean off to the side and he's throwing a hook that sort of, it's almost like a hook that comes downwards, followed by a shovel hook that comes upwards, like an uppercut that comes upwards. So it's almost like a diagonal trajectory rather than side-to-side hooks. Now, the reason I like this is because if somebody does have a high guard, it is something that will travel between the guard and underneath the elbow. The problem with it is that you're leaning off to the side and you're throwing shots from an angle where you're leaving yourself open to right hooks. But the theory behind it, because he's also working from what it looks like on the pads to throwing a 1-2, moving to the left and throwing a left hook. So the theory of both combinations, just from an observational perspective, is to cut off the exit point of Alexander Usyk, moving away to Anthony Joshua's own left. It seems, therefore, that he wants to target the body, get close, try and tie him up. This is something that I've been an advocate of if you're talking about the tactical approach of Anthony Joshua. But like I've said, if he does go down this route of trying to turn it into a war, whilst it increases his chance of winning, in my opinion, it also increases his chances of getting knocked out. He's going to have to go for a firefight, essentially, a more physically draining fight from earlier in the fight. And he was exhausted in a chess match against Usyk. So my question is, what do you guys think of this new approach that he seems to be working on the pads? Is it just pads and it doesn't mean anything? Or does it genuinely convey a potentially new tactical approach? Is he putting something out there as misdirection and he's working on something completely different? But if he is to go down that route, do you give him more chance or less chance? Maybe you disagree with me. Let me know your thoughts, guys. We'll start off with Gman.
Right. So with AJ Usyk, as you said there, it looks like on the path he's looking at the body. I was baffled that he didn't try and attack Usyk's body more in the first fight. Absolutely baffled me. Because if you look at previous fights, like example against Povetkin and Usyk, similar in terms of kind of like dimensions, different style, obviously, but he jabbed Povetkin's body early on, and it really took the legs away from Povetkin and made him more open to the headshots. Against Usyk, he just seemed to ignore Usyk's body. So if he does do that in this rematch, which we're looking at next year, it'll slow the legs down of Usyk, definitely. So I think that's a good thing. In terms of going for an all-out war, I mean, I can see where they're coming from in that sense, but that could fire dramatically back in AJ's face. And, you know, AJ trying to be a bit more physical, he needs to do that, I think, in a certain sense, but that's also going to be a lot more taxing on the body, a lot more draining on the body. Now, we've seen AJ get tired, as you said, in a boxing match with Usyk. If he doesn't find the relevant success against Usyk with these new tactics early on in a certain amount of time, I think he's going to be a sitting duck late on in that fight. He really needs to be smart with his approach in this rematch. If he's talking about going all-out war, I just can't envision that working out well for AJ unless he really just catches Usyk stone cold at the start of the fight by surprise. I just can't envision a scenario where Usyk gets taken out early, and I can't envision a scenario where AJ has energy left in reserve after about 5-6 rounds. I really can. I think that's a dangerous approach. But saying that, having seen how the first fight went, I think it's the only likely approach they can take at this stage. Maybe they could put elements of, slowing it down with a bit of boxing in the rematch, go to the body, as well as maybe try and tie Usyk up as best you can. But we see Usyk, look at some of the rounds, I think it was the 8th round or 9th round, when AJ did try and get Usyk and try and get a free hand for uppercuts, Usyk knew immediately that uppercut was coming and to just move back. So AJ was kind of like stuck in that sense. So it's interesting. I think what I can take from that, AJ going to the body, yes, that'll help him. But this aggressive war approach, it could work, but it could also backfire dramatically.
Jamie, what are your thoughts, mate?
Yeah, I do agree on the body approach. I think that's something that can work, and I think at times when he did do it in the 5th and 6th round, he found some success. But for me, the grappling and things like that just seems like another way to drain your energy even quicker, in my opinion. Inside fighting is an incredibly tough skill that not many fighters master, and in the turnaround of this fight, I feel like it sounds like it makes sense, but against Usyk, I feel like he's just going to run into trouble a little bit earlier. I think the one thing for me watching that fight back the other day was how just bamboozled Joshua was by the lead hand of Usyk, and that left hand Usyk couldn't miss really. And I do feel like that for all the things that Joshua's going to try and do in this fight, all of the things that he's going to look to do differently, the things he's going to be working on. When that bell goes and Usyk is just a matrix that you can't predict, and he's offering up things that you're just not used to, I feel like tactics and kind of plans and routines goes out the window a little bit, and you're kind of almost left just fighting on a bit of will. And when we did see Joshua start to have some success, Usyk found another gear. He found more energy than Joshua could ever imagine. And it just, for me, I do worry that for all of these plans and stuff that he has, it sounds great, but for me, I'm just not sure whether he can adapt like Usyk can adapt in a 12-round fight, in my opinion.
Well, one of the other things as well, I mean, G-Man, you gave the example there of Povetkin and that fight. And while I can't disagree, the dimensions of the fighters, as well as how they deliver their shots, are so different. Of course, there's a hooker. He loves to come in with lead power shots that are short. Alexander Usyk likes to fight long. And to go to the body, if you're going to come downstairs and get yourself into range, he did have that success in the 5th and 6th round. But Usyk might be able to feint, draw in that shot, and then land with shots that are longer. So AJ is definitely going to be putting himself in the firing line in a much more obvious manner if he is going to go to war. And as Jamie says, that might not work. But I also see it as a case of you've got to try something different, right? And there are certain advantages he does have. He is the bigger man. He is the bigger one punch. He does have the bigger one punch power. Although I do think Usyk's power is highly underrated. And I think a lot of it is down to the method of delivery rather than him not carrying the power. He doesn't really sit on his shots in that way. But if AJ does take risks, I could imagine him walking onto something. Also, something we haven't spoken about is that Murat Gassiev is a massive puncher, huge left hook, and he focused his assault to the body on Usyk. And Usyk found a way to adapt. So Anthony Joshua has certainly got his work cut out, but we have seen him lose in the past to Andy Ruiz. The majority of people at the time didn't give him much hope, and he found a way to win the rematch. I know Ruiz is not Alexander Usyk, but I have been sort of surprised by the way people have just written AJ off as some sort of fraud. I still think they're two elite level heavyweights. And so I'm really looking forward to it. And I just want to ask you both just one word answer: repeat or revenge? G-Man.
Repeat. And I want to point, Jamie said something there that was interesting.
Go on.
When AJ had a success in the 5th and 6th rounds, Usyk was able to find another gear. How do we know that was Usyk in top gear? How many more gears has Usyk got to go through? In that sense, I can't help. But with Ruiz, I could see how AJ could win the rematch. With this, I can only see one thing, and that's repeat.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a big statement then. So, Jamie, do you agree with G-Man? Do you think, I mean, what percentage do you give Anthony Joshua here? Does he only have a puncher's chance?
With me, 70-30, 80-20 Usyk.
Jamie?
Yeah, I'd go that big as well, to be honest. I just, like you say, I think he has to work on these things. He has to find a way to win, but I just don't necessarily believe he can deliver them. You mentioned I found it interesting, actually, Usyk mentioning the kind of the psychological stuff that in fight week, I did it in my own videos where I just said, there's so much nervous energy from Joshua that it's kind of blatant, really. When he's asked questions at pressers, he talks for 4 or 5 minutes about nothing really to do with the fight. It's about mind control, all this type of stuff. And, you know, the ring walk and kind of pander into the crowd whilst Usyk is stone-faced and not playing up to the fireworks and everything, and just walks through the platform and gets to the ring, gets it done. I just feel like there's a mental edge for Usyk. I think there's an ability edge. I just don't see a way Joshua wins it, unfortunately.
Can I just chime in there real quick for a sec? Do you think that this is about you guys is an issue for Joshua? Whereas Usyk, it's just Usyk is himself, stoic, stone-faced, whereas AJ's trying to play the role of like this person for this camera, this person for this camera, and it's ending. That's confusing him more than anything else, which is also taken away from
Jamie?
Yeah, I definitely feel that way. And I feel like we've sort of seen it in his career. The first Ruiz fight, up until that point, he was as media trained as you can get. Then for the rematch, he sort of became the old AJ that he likes to say, the Femi came out, as he likes to say. And sort of for the Pulev fight, you kind of saw him being aggressive in the head-to-head and the presser. And then for this fight, again, I just feel like he sort of played up to Usyk's games. And I think if I was Alexander Usyk during fight week, I would have been one very relaxed man, because he just... the pictures together, the sort of handshakes and everything. You don't need to be disrespectful or anything like that, but I think someone with a bit more confidence and a bit more knowing themselves probably wouldn't have pandered to it as that much, and probably would have been a little bit more They would have shut themselves off at a point, like we see with a Terence Crawford. Friendly with Sean Porter throughout the pressers, the fight week, the build-up, the interviews, gets to the head-to-head and something switches in Crawford. I feel like some of these elite fighters know themselves. I don't feel like Joshua does, and I definitely agree with what you just said, Gman.
See, I'm going to have to disagree, and that's a beautiful thing. It's good that we don't all agree on everything, right? Because for me personally, and this is controversial, I know, I think the real Anthony Joshua is not Femi, the one that's produced. I think the real AJ is the one who does come across like a nice guy, a guy that wants to have a bit of banter and a bit of a laugh. And while I understand there are people like Terence Crawford who will switch on in fight week, there are some fighters who are nice guys throughout. Guys that are like Manny Pacquiao, a guy that you're a big fan of in Nonito Donaire, Jamie. So yeah. I just think personally he needs to be true to himself. Now, I understand I'm in the minority here. Hatman agrees with you guys, by the way. Hatman's exact quote was he needs to start hanging out with a man then more and become a little bit more aggressive. And I understand what he's talking about. When you surround yourself in that sort of aggressive atmosphere, kind of like Rocky when he goes to train with in the Apollo Creed gym. Was that in Detroit or Philadelphia? Philadelphia, right? No, wait, was Apollo from Philadelphia or Detroit? I can't remember now. Why am I thinking Detroit? Wherever it was, you know the scene I'm talking about. I'm wondering whether that would indeed help AJ. But personally, I still feel that the problem here, whilst I do agree that he certainly needs to know himself more, I do believe he has doubts about himself. I also don't think him coming across as ultra aggressive in the build-up and switching on. I would think that would be a show for the cameras too. I just don't think it's who he is. I think everybody's different, you know, even in you look at a changing room of a team sport, for instance, like football. You'll have a lot of footballers who just before kickoff, some of them are listening to music, other ones withdraw within themselves, other ones are practically banging their heads off the walls. Everyone's got a different approach. And I'm not sure Anthony Joshua trying to be aggressive is who he really is. And I can't imagine it intimidating Alexander Usyk. So for me, it would be a wasted venture. That might sap more energy, in my opinion. But I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see how he approaches it. Let's move on to Canelo Alvarez and his potential fight with Ilunga Makabu. A lot of people of late, a lot of pro fighters seem to be undermining this fight. You've got people like George Groves who are saying he only sees Canelo Alvarez winning this fight. David Benavidez, his coach, his father, has come out and basically said that he doesn't understand why why Canelo would want to fight Ilunga Makabu. There's no interest in the fight, that he should be fighting David Benavidez. What do you guys think in terms of the bigger test for Canelo Alvarez? Is it Ilunga Makabu? Is it Benavidez? Is it a guy like, that would be if it's at 168. If he does go to 175, we know, of course, there's Beterbiev and Bivol. In terms of a test, what do you think is the bigger test? Is it the big cruiserweight who isn't really a great boxer? Or is it, you know, his rival or a guy who's trying to be his rival at 168 in Benavidez? Is it the big scary Beterbiev or the brilliant boxer with fantastic distance control in Bivol? Who would you say is the bigger test? But additionally to that question, I want to ask you about a little idiosyncrasy with regards to this. The question of Ilunga Makabu potentially being asked to fight at 190 with WBC. There have been rumors that they won't demand that, but we don't yet know for sure. He hasn't fought there for a number of years. So you're talking about a guy who's outgrown that. If he has to bring his weight down to that and drain himself to that, and then there is a rehydration clause, which it seems to be used a lot today by a lot of fighters, including Canelo Alvarez. What you're basically saying is that he should come in drained and not even be allowed to rehydrate to a healthy level. So I also want to ask about rehydration clauses and whether you think they should be banned from boxing, not just because of it being unfair from a sports perspective, but the potential danger of it. And if there is a rehydration clause in place, do you believe that the Ilunga Makabu victory, if it was indeed to be a victory, would actually lose its value? I'm going to give that one to Jamie first off.
So where do you want me to start with? The rehydration part of it, or kind of more around Canelo?
If Makabu comes in healthily at any weight he wants, what do you think the biggest test is out of those 4 fights? And if Makabu is not going to come in, then at that weight, at his ideal weight, then elaborate on the question of rehydration clauses.
So I think if it's at 200 pounds, the normal cruiserweight limit, Makabu is probably up there as one of the tougher tests. But again, I see Canelo winning. My kind of thing with Canelo, and I say it all the time, is that I see fights for him that I think, yeah, that person can do this for a number of rounds. I think this person can do this for a number of rounds. And they're all very different. Benavidez is a volume puncher that likes to come forward. Bivol, like you say, distance control, is kind of in and out movement would be an issue. I just feel like Canelo overcomes those problems eventually. He's become very efficient with his output and kind of his shot selection and everything like that. The toughest test for me is Artur Beterbiev. It's genuinely the only fight that I see as a 50-50 for Canelo, or a 60-40 either way type of fight. I don't see any other fight like that. Like I say, I see people giving him issues for some rounds, but the only person I genuinely see with a chance against him is Beterbiev, and that's because of the physicality, the power, also the belief. When you fight someone like Beterbiev, you have to have sort of supreme confidence that you can last those 12 rounds with him. I think Vosdik was a beaten man before he went in. He got stopped by him in the amateurs. I think Canelo would be one fighter that it would be interesting to see. You know, Canelo is such at a point now where he does want to go up to a cruiserweight and fight Makabu. He wants to test himself against everyone. That's the fight for me where I genuinely would have a complete 50-50, and I'm not sure who would win it, and I would really have to think about it. And I think you'd see the most divided opinions. Whereas Benavidez, Bivol, I think there's people that would say they each give him problems. I don't think they win. I think Makabu, he beats him as well, especially if it's at 190. And to move on to the rehydration clause, I don't like that personally. I don't like weakening an opponent to, you know, for your benefit. And in terms of rehydration clauses, it's a bad thing for Makabu, who hasn't fought there in a number of years. £10 is a big difference. And when we saw them at the WBC convention, you just noticed that Makabu, there's not a massive height difference, but he's almost double in width and thickness. He just looks much, much bigger. So that would really knock it down a couple of levels for me. I would have a Benavidez win, a Bivol win, a Beterbiev win higher than Makabu if he brings him down. Maybe I'd put it up a little bit if it is just level playing field at 200. But for me, rehydration clauses, I do think it's dangerous for some fighters, but then you also have the argument of fighters that can literally just rehydrate crazy and pile on the weight and then have a 10-15 pound advantage on fight night and it goes up too much. Whether they widen those rehydration clauses, whether they change it from being 24 hours or the morning of the fight and bring it forward slightly, I don't know how that would work. But, you know, I do think there's probably a place for it. But in terms of, sometimes I think they're a little bit strict. You see it, especially at the lower weight classes, it does become a bit of an issue. But I feel like there's a place for it, but they probably need to have a bit of a stricter look at it.
So G-Man, does that matter though? I mean, if I'm capable of making the weight, does it really matter how much water weight I put on in terms of it, the question of fairness? I mean, isn't it more unfair to make sure that I'm dehydrated and not at my best? Or we're essentially creating a scenario where you can say, if you make the weight, you can have the fight. But from that point forth, you're going to be weaker. You're not going to be at your best. I'm not going to let you be at your best, which is dangerous, but also from a sporting perspective, unfair. Or do you agree with Jamie that when it comes to rehydration, there still needs to be some sort of cap? What's your position on that?
No, I think there still needs to be some sort of cap. I don't like them personally. And at the same time, like, when I look at like some of these weights and I see some fighters who have won titles, you know, a good name springs to mind is Chavez Jr. at middleweight. I mean, he was winning fights against guys like Andy Lee because he was a cruiserweight on fight night. I think that something needs to be put in place for that, because I think it's dangerous to be cutting that amount of weight, but it's also dangerous to put something in place that restricts them from packing, you know, the weight back on. I think if we're looking at rehydration clauses, and if that's a separate topic, something needs to be put in place to stop these fighters cutting excessive amounts of weights, because for some people, as Jamie said, especially in the lower weight divisions, it's actually quite crazy when you look at it. Like, I remember James McDonnell was 140 something when he fought a new weight on fight night. He weighed 118 at the weigh-in. It's absolutely crazy. In terms of Canelo and Makabu, if it's at 190 and he's had to, yes, Makabu's not the biggest cruiserweight in the world, but he's been kind of weighing more closer to 200 pounds the last few fights. If he's having to come down 10 pounds and then he's limited to how much weight he can put on after making, you know, a artificially low weight by his standards, yeah, you got to raise an eyebrow with that. In terms of the fighters, I mean, Makabu, I think people like George Groves, maybe they have the memory of the Bellew fight in their head, where Makabu was completely just steamrolled by Bellew, and they don't look at what he's done since then, because he's not a bad fighter. He's tough. He's defensively poor, but very tough. I mean, if you're taking Kudryashov's best shots and you're not going down, you've got a good chin. I think that fight would be it. And Papin, no, he's been in there with some big punchers, very big punchers, and he's not gone down. So he has a good chin. And I'm sure if he can take their shots, he can take Canelo shots for definite. I think that would be a 12-round win for Canelo. In terms of Benavidez, the volume, as Jamie said, could be an issue. What do you gain from the Benavidez? There's no title there. What's the incentive? Benavidez is not exactly, he's not the biggest, I suppose, all-Mexican kind of affair on one of the Mexican holidays. Yes, I get that. Bivol, the distance, definitely would give Canelo some issues in parts. But the best fight out of them, and the one I think that poses Canelo the most risk, is Beterbiev. I mean, Beterbiev, as you said, with Usyk was beat before he got in the ring. With Brown, seemed like mentally he was beat. You know, he started off strong and he realized, I can't do anything with this guy. He hits too hard. He's breaking me down. It was like mentally Brown was just, I remember the knockdown. Brown could have got up, but he was like, I can't win this fight. There's nothing I can do to offset this guy. Beterbiev as well, massive at that weight, strong. That's the fight I would take for Canelo. As long as there's no rehydration. Because even for Beterbiev, I mean, Beterbiev was fighting in London 2012 at heavyweight. Knocked out, what's the guy's name? I can't think of his name. The cruiserweight, the KO doctor, Dorticus. Knocked him out, I think, on the way to the Olympics, or maybe it was at the Olympics, but I know he had a first-round win over him. Fought Usyk in the heavyweight division in the Olympics. I think it was in the Olympics anyway. I know they fought. So this is a big guy. And if you're putting a rehydration clause on him, who's already, you know, I'd say tied at 175, how much is that going to take away from someone like Beterbiev if that's in place for them fights? Because you could pose the argument, okay, you beat, let's say next year, Canelo fights Beterbiev, rehydration clause of, we'll say, 10 pounds or something like that, or, you know, name me a number, but there's a rehydration clause there that on fight night he can't weigh any more than X amount, and Canelo wins it and Beterbiev doesn't look good. Argument is, you're struggling at the weight already, and you've restricted him from, you know, going to his more natural weight in terms of, you know, packing the weight on after the fight. Did you fight him at his best? Did the rehydration clause take it out of him? To me, it kind of does. There's always going to be that kind of like, well, yeah, you beat him, but there were so many stipulations for him to go through going into the fight. Did you get him on the fight night at his optimum, or did you get him at 60%?
You know what I love about this particular interview with you guys? That again, I disagree, and I love that, because when people disagree, it's true, because we're all able. The beautiful thing about boxing and having these opinions is that we don't always know the correct answers. You know, when you're making predictions and stuff like that, if you knew and everything was factual, there'd be no point in watching it. We watch it for the drama. And the areas that I disagree, firstly, I personally do not see a problem with rehydrating to anything you want, because you gave the example, say, of Inoue. Well, Inoue could if he was capable of doing it, could dehydrate himself to the point where he goes all the way low again and he's fighting guys that are naturally smaller. There's an ability, a physical ability there, to be able to lose enough weight and then put on enough weight to be able to work in a manner that enables you to be at your best. Some athletes are capable of doing that. Some are not, in the same way that some athletes are capable of having great stamina naturally. Others are not. Some are very fast naturally. Others are not. Some hit hard. Others are not. So for me, I don't see it as an unfair disadvantage. You're told you have to make this weight. That's fine. After you've made that weight, I want to see you come in healthily. The other area that I disagree a little bit as well, I agree that he would likely beat David Benavidez. The other three, if I was in their training team, Bivol, Beterbiev, or Makabu, if they didn't beat Canelo Alvarez, I'd be fuming. I mean, okay, we won't talk about the two light heavyweights. You know, we can all envisage how they would win the fight. When it comes to Makabu, he's not at the level of Canelo Alvarez. There's no doubt about that in terms of skill set. But he is such a bigger man, and he's a puncher at cruiserweight. Even if you're incapable of boxing Canelo Alvarez, you have to just punch with him. Land on anything, hit the arms, the body, aim your shots low. We know that Canelo Alvarez has had some stamina issues. He even had to take pretty much the whole of round 7 off against Caleb Plant, and Caleb Plant was moving. He wasn't applying real pressure on Canelo Alvarez. So I can't see Canelo walking down a healthy Makabu. If Makabu's drained or there's a rehydration clause, well, then he's fighting a skeleton and I don't even want to see it. But if it's a healthy Makabu, I would be fuming with Makabu if I was part of his training team and he lost the fight, which means if he's healthy and he comes in at, you know, a healthy, no rehydration clause, 200 pounds, and Canelo was to win the fight, I'd give him massive props, because he'd overcome an obstacle that would have been a very difficult obstacle to overcome, unless Makabu's completely stupid and tries to let Canelo work and then work after him, or he does. You've just got to punch with him. And the thing is with Canelo as well, it did take him a long time to I mean, he didn't stop. It took him a long time to stop Plant. He didn't stop Julio Cesar Chavez, who is big at the weight, but was drained to just, he looked terrible that night. He looked like Skeletor from E-Man. So I'm wondering, can Canelo actually walk this guy down and knock him out? Because Makabu's been in there with bigger punches than Canelo. So to me, it's fascinating on the condition that Makabu is healthy. And personally, I just don't like rehydration clauses at all. But yeah, it's interesting that we've all had these different opinions. I love that, guys. That's what this is about. You know, the ability to share different views and opinions and have different takes on it. And hopefully we get to see all these fights. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Do you just want to give both of your Twitter handles and your YouTube channels just to know where people can reach you? G-Man, we'll start off with you.
Yeah, well, my YouTube channel is nice and straightforward, just G-Man Boxing. So if you want, I only recently just hit 6,000 subscribers there in the last few weeks. So it's been good on the channel. It's been going great. I know, man, it's been going great. And for Twitter, it's just at Boxing G-Man. So that's my Twitter as well. If you want to go over there and give me a follow.
Jamie?
Yeah, so Punch Perfect Boxing on YouTube, nice and easy. And then on Twitter and Instagram, it's Punch Perfect Box. So just take the ing off and you should find me on there as well. So yeah, anyone that wants to come over, you're more than welcome.
Well, thank you very much as well, guys, from me for joining us. I hope you've all had a wonderful Christmas, and I hope your festive period continues to be brilliant. We'll be bringing in more videos with a couple more guests over the coming week or so. Thanks to G-Man. Thanks to Jamie. Chat to you soon, everyone. Take care. God bless.